It affects me.
What's up, you guys? How are you? Happy Tuesday. All right, guys, on to episode 52. How fun is it going to be when we get to 100? So,
it's called a streak.
Brandon was sitting like back here. I was like, what, you don't want to do this? All right, guys, so we're going to continue today talking about judgment. So yesterday we talked about judgment, judging other people, judging ourselves. So today we're going to continue with judgment of why are we so fearful of other people judging us. So we're going to dive a little bit into where that comes from, how to shift it, and how to really like honor it when it comes up for you, and understand it more, and then how to move around it.
So I think this is one of the things that understanding this can, I know for myself, yet again, when you can see things through a different lens, can give you a much bigger sense of freedom, right? Because I think when it comes to judgment, we see oftentimes is coming from the place of what we do as human beings, right? Like we try to avoid pain to move to pleasure and enjoyment, right? And so oftentimes when it comes from a place of judgment,
Did I say Cassius?
I don't think I said Cassius. Did I say Cassius? Oftentimes when we come from a place of worrying about judgment, we could have kind of this underlying sense of that's going to cause me pain. So, an example when we were discussing this that came to mind is, for myself, when I was going through my own aspects of life, right? Like we go out to a party, we go out to whatever, we go out for a night on the town with my buddies and like I made the conviction, right? Like it wasn't a solid conviction, but I made the thought of before we go out, like, okay, I'll go out tonight. I'm not gonna drink, I'm not gonna do all those things, but I'll go hang out, right? And so you go out the first, hour, like, nah, I'm all good. Like I got my water, I got whatever, I'm all good. Don't worry. As the night goes on, progressively, more and more people start coming up to you like, you know what, you want a drink? I'm going up there. You want me to grab you a beer? Want me to grab you those? Like, no, I'm all good. And then all of a sudden, the follow-up question, well, what's wrong with you tonight? Right? Like, if something wrong, what are you trying to do? What, you in AA? What's sort of like, did you get in trouble? What's going on with you, right? And it's not even like coming from a place of even judgment, but the perception of that is all of a sudden my value, my status within this group is going to be lowered, right? And so yet again, because we make every decision based off our feelings and our emotions, so when my status or when my interpretation of what I'm going to be perceived at within that group, because yet again, us as human beings, we are tribal people, right? Like back in the days, in order for us to live and survive, we had to confide and rely on other people, i.e. a tribe. And when we were cast out of that tribe, that usually meant that we were going to die, right? And so that's an inherited thing within us. And so as we go through those things and all of a sudden we start to perceive those judgments or perceive those things, whether they're true or not, it's our interpretation of that. All of a sudden that could lead us into making decisions that may not have been in alignment with what we were trying to do.
Well, I think we talked about yesterday, right? Like when we're judging other people, it's just a mirror to ourselves, right? And so if we're in judgment of ourselves, we're going to have fear of that other people are judging us, right? Because we're doing it, we're judging ourselves. You're like, well, if I'm judging myself, they must be judging me. Like they must be thinking what I'm thinking, which is usually not true, right? They're not usually thinking that, because the honest truth, you guys, is that most of us are so wrapped up in our own selves that we probably don't even notice, right? Like nobody notices that you gain 5 pounds or that you're not drinking, or like they don't actually care because they're all worried about their own stuff, right? We're all stuck in our own thing. But when you realize that like underneath judgment is fear, right? And for most of us, in not almost always, but in a lot of cases, what's underneath fear is a lack of worthiness, right? Is a worthiness wound. And I know sometimes we're like, I feel worthy, I'm good. Like I totally thought that. I was like, I don't have a worthiness wound. And then I started looking at all these beliefs and these thoughts and the emotions, and I was like, I totally have a worthiness wound, right? And so it's deep down in there. It's not like you're walking around going, yeah, I don't feel worthy, right? It's not that. But when you start to peel back these layers, you're like, okay, there is a deeper wound here. Where did that come from? And how do I start to shift it, right? Because once you feel worthy and you're like, I'm good in who I am and I don't actually care if you like me. Well, you'd probably care if your significant other likes you, but like, I think people around you, like you shouldn't care what other people think about how you're showing up in your life, what you're doing, as long as it's in alignment with you and you know what alignment is and you know like you're solid in who you are and you're like, my worth is based solely on all of the love and the attention and the understanding I give myself. I don't need it from anybody else, right? And all of a sudden you don't care if they're judging you because you're like, I'm good. And you can be like, it's cool if you don't like me. I'm not for everybody, and that's fine. And getting to that place, right? And that's like, how many people ever actually get there 100%? Not very many. But when you start to understand yourself, and you work on healing that worthiness, and you give yourself the love and the connection, and you meet all of your needs in ways that are alignment with your best self, all of that starts to fall away. It's not like all of a sudden you're just like, well, I don't care what people think. But all of a sudden you're just in alignment, and you know that you're acting in alignment, and then you just don't really pay attention to it. And the fear of what other people are going to think is going to go away, right? Like we always talk about, if you work on yourself, and you're 100% whole, then the love you get from people doesn't matter. The judgment you get from other people doesn't matter, but it's a value add, right? Like you don't need that to feel whole. You don't need an external thing to make you feel worthy. And therefore, like the external judgment doesn't bother you, because you're like, that's cool. Like this is my vision. This is where my life is going. If somebody over here doesn't see it, well, then that's okay. And I'm going to love them and release them, and I'm going to move on. And when you can start to understand that, yet again, working on yourself, doing the work, pulling back the layers, getting into those things, that's where you start to see all this growth and all of this change, and everything in your life start to shift in a loving way, not because we're trying to push it out of our life.
Well, and I think, for a lot of us, because I will say one thing that I just am very blessed of the way I was raised around my dad was always one of those things of like, look, in a million years from now, it really doesn't matter. You do you, who gives a shit? It doesn't really matter, right? And so growing up, it was like, I had a sense about me of like, I could care less what other people think about me. And then all of a sudden, like, of course, there was other things that I was fearful of, right? Like if I didn't do certain things with my buddies, all of a sudden I would be outcast, or I didn't feel like if I didn't participate in certain realms of going to a party, going those things, maybe I wouldn't be as of value to that. But at the same time, looking back over my life, especially when I went through the time frame of breaking up with my high school and college girlfriend, stopped playing football. All of a sudden there was a massive amount of uncertainty floating around my life, and a massive amount of identity crisis that was floating around with that. And then I look back of like, what was I also doing at that moment in time? All of a sudden, because I was lost, because I didn't have a sense of identity, because I didn't know who I was and what I stood for, I was also participating in a lot of other activities that now I look at that now I wouldn't do, right? Like I was going out 6 nights a week. I was going out and drinking all the nights. I was participating in drugs. I was participating in a lot of other relationships. I was doing a lot of different aspects of what I value now. It wouldn't align with what I was doing back then, right? But because I didn't have that sense of understanding about myself, and I didn't have my grounded of identity and understanding what my values were and all these things, because I was so much in just turmoil, that casted me down a road of I was fearful of being judged because I had just lost everything that I had known. And so that started me participating in other things that I normally wouldn't participate in, right? And so it's being able to understand that and understand for yourself of being able to make the decisions for yourself coming from a place of, well, does this align with your values? Is this part of your boundaries that you require for yourself? Is this aligning with the vision that I have within myself, right? And like, if you hadn't asked those questions, you probably are participating in things that may not feel right to you, right? Like we do see this all the time still in athletes. Like I look back at yet again when I was at the height of my competitive career as a CrossFit athlete, right? Like, you know what? There was a lot of times, and we discussed this a lot with our clients of like, well, is what we're planning for the day the best thing for you today, right? Because I look at myself of like training 5-6 days a week, 3 hours a day. Like there was days I was just beat down. I was overtrained. I was underslept, didn't eat enough. But you know what? I would go to the gym and see somebody else doing something. So my value perceived was I have to do what they're doing or even better in order for me to meet my need. Otherwise, I was going to be judged and i.e. not going to be valued by my community, right? Where instead,
and you didn't feel worthy.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to feel worthy if somebody was doing more workout than him, working harder, right? Because like his worth was based on his hustle and his work ethic. So if somebody outworked him or overlifted him, then all of a sudden his worthiness was questioned. And so it was like, well, I got to do it no matter what, because that's how you're meeting your need for your worthiness. Well,
we see that even with athletes that we work with today, right? Like we, in our group atmosphere, right? Like we write structured workouts and we do scale and appropriately on there, but it's some athletes, it's a daily conversation of like, almost where you have to put blinders on what's on the board so they don't see it. Because if they see what everyone else is doing, they could have a broken leg and they're still going to try to fight hand to the nail to try to do what everyone else is doing. Not because they're conformist, but because of because of their sense of judgment is going to be cast of, well, if I'm not doing what's written on there, i.e. I'm not worthy of where my status is, right? And so it's being able to be aware and be able to really sit like, yet again, are these things affecting you, and is it affecting what's best for you in the long run, right? It's the long game on these things, and not just basing things on the immediate gratification, right? And I think that's the other thing that plays into, because yet again, as human beings, we are we are adapted to the aspect of immediate gratification because that helps us survive. But at the same time, it's understanding like, are you making decisions this moment in time because the judgment may be playing a role in there, and it's not actually aligning to the long game version of yourself?
Well, and I think you start to hear this with like a lot of athletes, and I've done it with myself, right? The shoulds, right? And if we talk about this in an athlete thing, well, I should be able to do what's on the board. I should do this because it's Monday. I should because, you know, my competition over there is doing. I should because I said I was going to, right? Like all the shoulds. I mean, this happened to us today. Like we went back to the gym and we have a pull-up bar at our house, but we can't kip, we can't do butterfly pull-ups. And so I've done a ton of strict pull-ups, which means that like adding a ton of intensity right now does not feel good. And so it's supposed to be 30 chest to bar pull-ups. And my brain is like, well, I should be able to do this, right? Well, that didn't make sense for my life today, so I didn't do them. But I was also alone. And I can tell you that if other people were around, I would have had this whole like, because I was judging myself. Like, I should be able to do this. Why can't I do these? It's only been 2 months. Like, that's silly, right? But I'm old enough and smart enough now to not hurt myself and be like, well, my hands aren't ready, my shoulders aren't ready, whatever. But I can guarantee you that I would have felt totally different if there's other people around. Like, well, I have this. I'm good at this movement. I should be able to do this. And I probably would have made a bad decision based on the fact that I was judging myself. And so I would assume that if I was judging myself, the other people would be judging me. But yet again, it's turn it back to yourself. It's mirror it back to yourself. Do they care, right? Probably not. Like, if Brandon was there, would he care if I did chest to bar pull-ups? No, right? But like, it's the should, so I should be able to do this because, right? Well, because why? Like, is there logic behind that should? But so much of that is that fear of judgment, that fear of not being worthy, that like status, right? Well, like 2 months ago I could do this and now I should be able to do it now. And like, that's just not always life. Life is not linear, right? Like, things don't go like that, whether it's in training, whether it's in, you know, coaching, whether it's in like in your job, whatever, like that, it's not all linear. And so being able to like give yourself grace internally and stop judging yourself, right? And then understand that, you know, if people are judging you, they're not your friends. Like, if people are honestly judging you, it's more about them than it is about you, right? And if people are judging you and saying stuff to you, they're not really on your team. They're not on your side. They don't need to be in your life, right? And if their opinion matters to you, then you need to have some boundaries around how you actually do that. That's a whole nother topic. But like, if people that are judging you actually care about that, are judging you, you need to look at what's actually going on. And if it's not serving you and it's not in alignment with you, then you need to have some conversations with those people about, hey, like, this is where I want my life to go and this is what I'm doing. And if you're not going to be supportive, then you don't get to be a part of my life, right? That's a whole nother tangent. We can talk about boundaries. But again, it's understanding like what's happening internally with you and what's happening internally with them, because that's what it's about. It's not about the situation. It's not about the thing. It's not about any of that ever. It's about what needs you're trying to meet, what's going on like with your own healing, and the same thing of what's going on with their own healing, right? Because if we're judging, there are projections. If they're judging you, they're projecting what isn't healed in them. And a lot of times those are the same wounds. And so they come out and they look like this big judgment, but it's really not.
Well, and Courtney just said it based off your needs, right? Like we talked about modeling, right? Like we talked about modeling, like I think episode 5 in this whole thing, right? But it's understanding that on your modeling of the world, right? Like if your way of modeling is I have to be in alignment with what everyone else does, right? Like if my best friend jumps off a bridge, yep, I'm the second one falling behind them, right? Like if that's your modeling of the world and that's how you received the feeling of significance, of love, of feeling like you're of value, most likely this is also going to play a big role in whether or not you're aware of external judgment being cast on you. So yet again, all these things that we've been discussing all revolve around each other, right? Like they're not separated, they're not segregated on there. It's understanding that, yet again, the more awareness, the more understanding that you have for yourself and where these things come from and where you made the decisions that you did, because yet again, all these things are based off decisions and our own interpretations, right? And so it's when we can have awareness and we can have better understanding and better awareness of these things, then all of a sudden we can make a different decision and probably elicit a different outcome and a different experience for ourselves, not based off of fear.
Yeah, exactly. Because when we shift from fear to love, that's when it all starts to change, right? So you always think, like with us, it's observation, or it's awareness. We do this right. Awareness, then observation, and then non-judgment, right? Of all of the things that you're realizing about yourself. So we said this yesterday, don't judge yourself for judging yourself, right? And so when you're starting to notice this judgment, don't judge that you're judging it, right? Like, oh, where did this come from? What need am I trying to meet? What value is showing up for me? Like, ask those deeper questions. Is this true? Is it real? Is it mine? And all of a sudden you're down like 6 layers and you're like, oh, well, this all actually makes sense because I peeled back the layer of other than being like, oh, I shouldn't feel like this, or why do I feel like this, or why, like it's all super simple. If you can first find awareness, stop, observe what's going on, and then look at it with a non-judgmental lens, everything will start to shift and then you're like, okay, I can come at this from a loving place. Again, we're not trying to push things away. Like when we're in fear, it's like, I'll push it away. Like when we're loving it, we're like, I'm going to lovingly honor this, accept it, and then shift how I look and feel about it so that it just goes out of my life without that forced pressure, right? It's just going to flow out of your life. The good stuff flows in, the bad stuff flows out without this like hustle and grind and push. Where's my...
No, just without this pressure, it just flows. That's kind of, yeah. Did you mean to do that?
We just made a quote, you guys. No, I didn't mean to do that, but I gotta go back and listen to it. So anyway, anything else?
No, but I would say, yet again, I think this all ties massively, everything ties massively back to the 6 human needs, right? Like we did this video. What video was that? Like 3. It was our 3rd episode of this, you guys. So, if this is, yet again, if this is resonating with you and this is kind of where you're like, that's his injury, go back to that episode. I think, yet again, we might repurpose this one after, 52 episodes of this thing, just so we can kind of bring it back a little bit more fresh. But everything revolves around that of understanding of why we make the decisions that we do, what plays massive roles for us, and how we're meeting our needs based off of these things. Because I would imagine if judgment is playing a big role for you, significance and how you get certain things met on there would also probably be up on your hierarchy of what you probably meet your needs with.
Amazing. Awesome, you guys. Hope you are having an amazing Tuesday. The sun's back out in Colorado, which we love. So go get your walk on. And we will be back tomorrow. We'll see you guys then. If you have questions about any of this, always feel free to drop us a comment or send us a private message. We're happy to help. So hope you guys are well, and we'll talk to you soon.
Later.